Hey everyone, this is Dan with The Road Chose Me, and this week I'm tackling the 12 volt wiring on the Jeep camper. This is by far the most complicated and involved system that I've ever designed and built, but it is absolutely something you can do yourself, and you can do it on a budget. I'm about to teach you how. Let's get into it right now. For the last few weeks, I've just been running all the 12 volt wiring in here behind the front passenger seat. And it's time to deal with all of that, so I need to get that seat out of the way so I have as much room to work as possible. And yes, I did disconnect the main starter battery before messing with these plugs on the bottom of the seat. I really don't want the airbags to go off. There's a lot to do here, and I need to mount the lithium batteries so that I know how long my cables are and how everything will route. So my first job here is to cut a hole in the floor inside the cabinet that's behind that rear passenger seat. All along, I knew the batteries would go down in the void that's under the camper floor that is actually the original footwell of where the rear passengers sat when this was a regular four-door Jeep. With the hole opened up, I'm good to go putting a bunch of 100 amp hour lithium Renogy batteries down there. And not so fast. It turns out I'm not so good at using a tape measure. The ribs in the original Jeep floor mean I'm about ½ an inch short on height. This is actually quite a problem. I'd wanted to fit 3 of these in for 300 amp hours of power. Now I'm not sure. So I don't know how to solve that problem. I'm just going to move on and work on something else more enjoyable. This is how I'm going to mount the Renogy Core One, which is a display that using Bluetooth connects to the lithium batteries and the charge controller, and at any time it can tell me the exact charge of the batteries, how much current is flowing in and out, what the solar is doing, all of that kind of stuff. It's a pretty neat all-in-one screen. And the Core One comes with a cable that I'm using here to power it straight off the 12 volt battery, or you can also power it off USB-C just as easily. So of course I wanted to run the cable nice and neat and keep it out of harm's way. Still looking to procrastinate on that battery problem, I decided to start running cables and wire everything up. So this is just on the other side of that cabinet right behind the passenger seat, and I want all the cables to come up through that hole I just drilled and then go into my charge controller and into the fuse block right there on that blank wall. In terms of mounting the charge controller, I wanted it in the passenger compartment where the air conditioning can still help cool it rather than keeping it inside a cabinet. And then I just played around and figured out where I wanted the fuse block relative to it. So then I measured 9 times before drilling holes and getting it all mounted in the center. One thing I did was put nuts in behind the charge controller to stand it off from the wood panel a little bit, just to try and get more airflow in behind it so it would cool a little bit better. And then this is what it looks like with the fuse block mounted as well. I wanted to make sure the cables would reach without having to extend them at all. This charge controller can take current from the alternator and trickle charge the starter battery, so I have to run big 6-gauge wires all the way up to the starter battery. And I actually ran those a while ago when I was doing the diesel heater, and here you can see I also put a 60 amp fuse in line just for safety's sake. So now all that's left to do is push all those cables up through the hole in the floor and start wiring everything together. And there's no need to watch me do this, the details get a bit lost. So let's talk through what I'm actually doing, and I'll show you and teach you how you can do this yourself. It's actually pretty straightforward. With the charge controller as the center of the universe, we'll start adding things and you'll see it's pretty simple. Everything's color coded and all of these are labeled by Renogy, so you can't go too far wrong. Easiest to connect, the solar panels. Whatever panels you have, the positive is a yellow wire and the negative is the black wire coming out of the charge controller. And if you don't have panels, you just don't plug them in. The next easy one is the input from the alternator, or actually the starter battery is what you wire it up to. So connect the starter battery negative to just that same black wire out of the charge controller and run the red wire from the charge controller all the way to the positive terminal on your starter battery. And make sure you put a big fuse in this wire, 60 amps, just in case it gets grounded to metal or something else goes wrong. And now we connect up the auxiliary or the house battery. In my case, it's lithium, but the charge controller supports a bunch of different batteries. This one is a brown wire out of the controller that says out positive. That goes to the positive on the battery. And the negative just once again connects to that same old black wire coming out of the charger. So now we can connect all of our electronic devices up to that house lithium battery. And you could just connect them directly, but the right way to do it is to use a fuse block so that they're all on individual fused circuits. So you run positive and negative from the fuse block straight to the battery, and then you can start connecting all your different things to the fuse block. Your fridge, your diesel heater, your water pump, your interior lights, your USB outlets, whatever you've got that runs on 12 volts, you connect a 12 volt positive to the side of the block and the negative is all at the bottom. And that way each circuit is individually fused. One thing you don't want to connect through the fuse block is the inverter. Because it can draw so much current, you need to connect it directly to the lithium battery and you need to use the right gauge of wire to do that. So there are a few wires in this system where it really matters what size you use. And to figure this out, I always just look up a chart. These charts tell you for the length of wire and for the amount of current, exactly what gauge you need. So my diagram has gotten a little complicated, but you can see if you just follow it through one wire at a time, there's actually not that much to it, and you really can do it yourself. Because there's not enough room down below to mount the batteries, I've decided to put the big 3000 watt inverter down there. So I'll make a bracket, make sure this thing is secured in nicely, and then run my huge 2-0 wires directly to this thing. Because it can pull so much current, it needs ginormous wires. So now that I've done all the parts of the job I enjoy, it's time to get back to my battery problem. And after a lot of back and forward, I've decided to run a single 200 amp hour lithium battery. And this is probably a little on the light side. I was aiming to have 300 or maybe even 400 amp hours, but I just physically can't make it fit down below, and I don't want to use up too much cabinet space up above. My math tells me that cooking a full meal will use less than 50% of this battery, and I have tons of solar and I'll be driving pretty frequently, so I'll see how it goes. In the future, if I need to, I will add another one, but for now, this is my solution. So what I need to do is make sure it fits, figure out a way to strap it down, run all of my wiring, and call this job good and done. So here we go, the 12 volt system is finally finished. Let's give you guys a walkthrough. So here I am, I'm in behind the passenger seat, pretty handy not to have the seat in. And you can see fuse block up on top with all the individual fused circuits, and then the Renogy DC MPPT Charge Controller. And I know it looks pretty complicated right now, there's a lot of wires there, but if you take your time, if you do one at a time, it's actually not that bad. And I fused everything separately so I can keep an eye on stuff. Right now I don't have the fuse in for the water pump or for the hot water heater because those are not currently wired up. I don't want to short anything out. And right here next to it is Renogy Core One, they call this. So this is a display. This is Bluetooth connected to both the battery and the charge controller. So right now we can see we're pumping out 9 watts of solar because the battery's full. I guess it doesn't need to make more solar than that. We can see the battery's at 100% and you can see current flow out of the system and all of that. Obviously there's not much current flow now. What happens if we make a whole bunch of current flow? Let's find out. So because there's no seat here, it's pretty easy to just climb right on through. Don't mind all the construction zone. There's a lot of work in progress. The plumbing is coming along. But now with everything wired up, we should be able to turn on the inverter. I've got the remote switch mounted up there. Now the inverter's on, the induction cooktop has come to life. Let's turn this thing on. We've got our nice little kettle there. Power first, heat, I'm going to crank it. Let's put it on maximum and get that water boiling. That is enough water for me to have a coffee. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for that to boil, we can check out a few other things. Down here is where the 200 amp hour battery wound up. And you can see we've got some massive 2-0 cable going straight down to the inverter because the inverter can pull some serious current. And I've got 4 AWG wires going over to the fuse block. The fuse block's rated for 100 amps, and I wanted to make sure that if I've got everything on, the water heater, the diesel heater, the fridge, all the things running, charging my laptop, I want to make sure we can actually handle that 100 amps of current. But now that the induction cooktop is on in force, we can see right now that we're pulling out 90 amps of current out of the battery, although the charge controller is putting out 27 amps on its own, 370 watts of solar are coming in. So you can see how that works. You need to add those together to get about 120 amps that the induction cooktop is actually drawing right now. Some of that coming out of the battery, some of that coming out of the solar panels. Pretty handy how it can do that. Obviously electricity, the way that it flows, the way that it just figures all of that out, it'll just keep trying to take as much from the solar as it can before it ends up taking it out of the battery. But you can see the battery's already down to 99%. We are using up power for sure. And the great thing about this battery is it's rated for a 200 amp continuous draw. So we can actually pull out twice as much as we are right now. But there we go, that is the conclusion of the 12 volt wiring in this vehicle and all the different accessories. I'll show you guys the water pump and the water heater later when I actually finish them. That's my last major job. Then there's a bunch of tidy up, a bunch of small jobs. I have got video footage of all the other things that are in here that I haven't talked about yet. I need to show you guys all of that. Right now I'm scrambling. The shipping date for this is locked in. It's all organized to get loaded into a container and get to a new part of the world. So big new adventures coming soon. But in the meantime, if you've got any questions about the 12 volt setup, don't hesitate to ask, happy to help. There's links in the description too for everything that I've used, all the Renogy gear, as well as everything I bought on Amazon. If you want to build a similar system, 10% off on the Renogy store using the code TheRoadChoseMe. So check that out as well. Big thanks to my Patreon supporters. They get early access, they get behind the scenes access. They've been learning about this stuff for a long time now. If you're interested in that, check it out over on Patreon. There's a link in the description. That is a lot of words to say. Thanks for watching, have fun out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road. And maybe it's time for a coffee. How long has it been? What is the timer? I'm gonna have a timer on the screen, I suppose. There we go. I would say, whoops, fog up the screen. I would say that counts as boiling water. That's pretty nice. I'll turn that off and we'll just come back over here and check. There we go. Our battery's down to 98%. So boiling water for a coffee when the sun is out takes 2% of my battery. But of course, right now the solar is going to charge that back up again. This is great. Induction cooking. Pretty happy with that. Until next time, guys, have fun out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.